Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Raya Laurie, Senior Manager of Global Brand Marketing, and I'll be your host for the next 30 minutes or so. Let me start by asking you a question you already know the answer to. How many channels does your brand support right now? That could be voice, SMS, WhatsApp, in-app, web chat. The list keeps growing. And for years, the advice was simple. You were to meet the customer in the channel they want, be everywhere, and say yes to every channel. That advice is starting to break down. Being everywhere, being omnichannel, isn't the same thing as being useful. A customer who wants to pay a bill doesn't care about your channel strategy, they care about getting it done fast. So today we're going to challenge that old way of thinking and share what high performing brands are doing differently. The shift we want to explore is this: how can we give the customer the best channel for what they want to accomplish? Our goal here is to design customer journeys that help customers reach their goals faster and with less friction. To walk us through how to do that, I'm joined by someone who spends his days designing these journeys for enterprise brands. Andrew Cole-Morgan is our Director of Field Architecture, and he's going to kick off our webinar by taking a step back and covering the basics of messaging, because voice is often the default channel that everyone is familiar. Of the many channels you have to choose from, voice is one we all know, but messaging gives brands this unique advantage in helping customers get what they need fast. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Looking forward to getting into this topic. And definitely, who wouldn't who wouldn't want to meet the customer, your customers, where they are? It is almost a truism. Of course, we want to do that. We want to be present where customers are. But what we've seen that has happened over the last little while is almost a move towards let's definitely leverage channels to get the deepest and highest breadth of use case available for sales and service. And we've seen this almost move from channel of choice and omni-channel kind of strategy to right channeling, if you like, and moving the customer to channels to meet their journey. So not just meeting the customer where they are, but meeting what they want to get done. And with that, we've seen almost a quite a dramatic shift from channels like social media centric channels, third party channels, into brand owned channels like in-app messaging that brings messaging into an authenticated space, closer to digital self-service, so your app and your customer portal, which just gives rise to getting more things done. And also with that, we've sort of seen a look at voice and messaging and how do we leverage the difference in modalities between those two to also with an eye on getting stuff done. And they've both got their place. And I guess to begin with, I thought let's level set and just look at the comparing and contrasting of messaging and voice, especially for those who might be with us today who are newer to messaging. So they're different, is what I'm getting to. Messaging and voice are different. Sometimes we forget that with messaging, the customer doesn't have to write down all of the information that's being passed on. And this is really important for quite lengthy information dissemination journeys, advice journeys. The customer is able to just have all of that received on their phone. And also that's similar, that's an equal benefit for if you've got a human agent, right? Reading out all of the advice and the answer, that can be quite time consuming. And so it's a lot easier for a human agent to disseminate information as well. And you have things like all of the conversations in view in your pocket on your phone. And as I mentioned earlier, the messaging ecosystem kind of lives closer to digital. So that gives rise to different opportunities. Another, I guess, technical sort of jargony word is asynchronous. And we talk about messaging being asynchronous, as in it can stop and start, and we can have multiple conversations going on at a time with relative ease. Whereas if we're talking about a voice conversation, we're tied up, we're synchronous, it's one to one. And we all understand that, but it's good to keep coming back to because there's certain segments of a journey where it just causes friction to be tied up one to one on voice. Sometimes there's complexity, and you want to have more of a long running process, which might start and stop, which does lend itself more to messaging. I'm in the midst of a broadband service issue myself at the moment, and the only way that that's being serviced is via voice, and I'm just playing phone tag constantly because we just can't get each other. And when I do get through on the phone, I just think to myself, gee, like that wasn't that complicated. I could have easily scheduled the technician on messaging and avoided, 5 rounds of phone tag. That would have been a lot easier. So there's certain things where, appreciating the virtues of the different modalities is good at design time. And then when it comes to AI, we have seen a lot of leaps and bounds in voice bot technology. It's really come a long way in the last 1 to 2 years. So much so that if you listen to a voice bot, a large portion of the population in a modern chatbot, they're not going to realize that it's a bot for the latest voice technologies. And you can have quite a nice experience. It's interesting actually on the voice bot side of things. We had a brand launch a voice bot recently, and they didn't disclose that it was a bot. So what actually happened was they noticed a fallout after the second turn of the conversation. So, the customer would sort of get into the engagement and then realize, oh, I'm talking to a bot. I don't trust that this is actually going to help me. I'm going to hang up. So there was this fallout. Once the customer realized it wasn't a real human, when we put a disclosure within the first turn to say, this is an assistant, this is a voice bot, and split tested that drop off fell away by 10%. So you can see even in voice, like we would in messaging as a rule of thumb, disclosing that you're actually talking to an AI can be a good thing. And I think that gets a little murkier on voice. But definitely, when we get to AI, the types of engagement is very different in terms of what you might want to automate. So, with a voice bot, definitely because it's synchronous, you're tied up one to one. You don't want a long running process, a long running journey. You really want things like what's the status of the case? Where are we up to? Maybe I want to run a quick transaction. Maybe it is just a really simple Q&A. But in terms of going through a big needs analysis with a customer or a consultation, some of those styles of engagements can last up to 30 minutes in messaging. Where we build in that complexity. So definitely there is a difference to how you deploy AI on the messaging channel and on the voice channel. And um, that needs to be taken into account. It's definitely not a build once and deploy everywhere. We used to talk about, I think, silos of data. We might be familiar with that analogy. And I think what we've got today is almost elements of silos of channel. We've got the digital way of doing things. We've got our contact center voice. We might have be be also doing messaging. There might be some other channels, kiosks and so on. With today's technology, it has become easier to channel hop. And we want to find the right place to do that. Do it when it makes sense. There's certain circumstances where it is useful to move the customer into another channel. But what we don't want to have happen is for the customer to ever feel like they're starting again. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with snakes and ladders. It's sort of a childhood game, I guess. You go up a ladder and you progress. You're sort of shortcutting. You land on a snake and you're sort of back to, you're taking a step backwards in the game. And when we are moving between channels, we really want to feel like moving up a ladder. It's that we're moving to a channel because where I'm up to in my journey, the channel I'm moving to is going to help me get to the end faster. Um, we don't want to land on a snake where it feels like I'm starting again. I've got to repeat my authentication. I've got to repeat all of the context. I'm just repeating myself. It just feels like I'm starting again. The baseline for designing CX in 2026 would be to never have those snakes. We don't want to have to repeat ourselves. If we're designing a channel hop or managing them that are happening organically, we really want that to be an elevation, not a degradation.
I feel like a good tagline would be no snakes in your CX.
Oh, okay.
But that's a great illustration because it's a very visual, like I learned visually and love to see like that thought of the channels can be a ladder. It doesn't matter if you're starting voice or messaging, what are you trying to get done and how can you prevent those hops that send you back to lost context and yeah, it's a really great visual.
The next little section here I wanted to cover is almost like a measuring stick. So, if we're going to start thinking about anticipating and designing these channel switches, then how do we still measure the end-to-end journey to make sure we're hitting the right marks? And whenever we build a journey, we think about four CX pillars in terms of are we helping the customer along the way? Is every element there? And they're simply get the customer to the right place. That's the first source of friction. If we can't channel them, route them to the right place, and this goes for, calling in on voice and also on messaging, that routing has got to be, really good. Because as soon as we've moved the customer to the wrong place, we're automatically in friction town, if you like. Definitely want to get that one right and continue to get that right. Don't forget the customer might need to be routed several times across their journey to get the job done. Now, there's that adage of sometimes in order to do something, you've got to know something. And that really underpins the way I see knowledge in CX. It's very seldom a destination in its own right. There's only few journeys where the customer's truly in research mode and that's it, or purely asking a question and that's it. There's usually something underneath. So, knowledge is generally a supporting piece along the journey. We want to be able to provide answers, educate, deal with buying objections, deal with policy questions along the way of helping the customer getting something done. And without that knowledge along the way, sometimes the customer is not confident in completing their journey. So it's sort of baking in that trusted advice. Um, you're going to buy off a salesperson who provides trusted advice. We know that. And the same goes for sort of building a CX journey. And thirdly, it's being heard. And this one I feel is underbaked. It's an emergent capability with generative AI, and there's probably space to do this everywhere. It might shock you to think that humans are bad listeners, or can be, right? Especially when you've got average handle time and those sorts of focuses. AI can talk all day. So here, regardless of whether it's voice or messaging, an AI that can listen and understand the nuance and all the unique facets about a customer's particular scenario is incredibly useful. And doing that pre action step, pre escalating to a human to go and do the thing, or pre going somewhere else to another AI or to digital serve to go and get the job done.
Quick question for
Lastly,
you here, Andrew. So, for Know and Heard, you have, and like these are founded on, knowledge AI agent and data collection AI agent. Can you explain what the differences are between those two AI agents?
yeah, in fact, the difference is now blurred. So it sort of goes to the point I was saying before about needing to know something in order to do something. So we tend to bake in a small knowledge agent capability within routing and also within data collection. So that while I'm in the process of working out what my intent is and what lies beneath that intent, along the way, we're injecting in those knowledge experiences. So sometimes it's a discrete end in itself, a knowledge AI agent, which is might help just with research and then pass off. But more commonly, I'd say 90% of the time, it's baked into other AI agents as opposed to its own thing, which might sound like, well, maybe it doesn't need a pillar. But it is critically important. You've got to have knowledge. It's just that it sits under those other experiences as a supporting piece. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
All right. So lastly is goal attainment. So customers aren't making contact for nothing. They want to get something done, even if their initial intent or utterance doesn't feel like that. Underneath, if we unpick, there's something that the customer wants to get done. So often I see experiences where, bizarrely, this bit gets forgotten, right? So we've done all of the routing, we've done all of the listening and the good work, and then it's like, all right, so now that we understand what you want to do, I think you should call the 1-300 number. It's not a great experience. So what we really want to do is with everything that we've, all the meat that we've put on the bone there, use it as a ladder, if you like. I'm really pushing that analogy. Use it as a shortcut to getting the thing done, right? So if you do need to jump to voice at that moment, make sure that that context all comes through and it's personalized, it's authenticated, it's everything you can possibly do to take away the friction. This next slide is really just a explosion of the last slide. So let's think of a complex query. Customers are coming to us with more and more complexity these days. How does this look in terms of routing and supporting knowledge? So we have a front door, which is able to do all of those things, route, inform. Once we know the intent, that allows us to only bring into scope of a RAG, retrieval augmented generation, of a knowledge AI, only bring into scope things that are relevant to that intent. It's almost cheating. It improves the robustness of it incredibly because instead of you having a RAG system that's just generic, you've got the specificity of just the knowledge relevant to that intent. So there is a strong interplay between routing and knowledge that we leverage behind the scenes when we start to map these things out.
Well, and routing has also dramatically shifted how we approach in driving intent or like how we action intent because, you've mentioned before in our conversations how intent used to be a very binary. You have a bucket of intents. Once you identify those, there's a very specific journey that intent will go on, a customer will go on. But now that's not necessarily the case. The routing AI agent can um, customize based on customers' specific intents.
Yeah, absolutely. We used to think, and this is not long ago, we used to think in terms of which intents are you going to automate? All right. And which ones do you need to escalate? A very binary kind of mindset. Whereas now we don't think in those terms. And this is also related to knowledge because knowledge is now no longer an intent. It's sitting under intent. So all of those FAQ kind of questions never modeled as intents. Intents are more action based to journey based. I want to get something done. Now, when we think about intent, we're not thinking about which ones am I going to automate. We're thinking about, well, which slice of that customer journey does it add value to the customer if I put a bot into there or an AI agent into there? Um, and how does that change during operations and after hours? Um, there are sweet spots for AI within customer journeys, and seldom is the entire customer journey AI. Usually, it's got some handoffs. So this channel switching, whether that's subtle or a big shift between messaging and voice, it's becoming more and more common because we're trying to do the end-to-end journey as part of the intent. Now, hopefully that's also making us a little more agnostic in terms of how the intent is being fulfilled. So on the far right of the slide there, number 3, we really see there's 5 main actors in fulfilling an intent. And hopefully we can leverage those and bring in the best hero to fulfill the intent. And if we need a couple of heroes, that's okay. We just want to make sure that we're cognizant that a channel hop can create friction. We're just trying to remove it as much as we can or minimize it as much as we can. And that allows us to not have these journeys that are dead ends. We want journeys that take the customer all the way to goal attainment, even if that's multiple goals. And if that means a channel hop or bringing in a few heroes to fulfill that journey, that's what we're trying to do, not leave the customer hanging. I wanted to give some real kind of use cases of where we see organically often. So we see these happening organically in transcripts, in sort of analysis, where it makes sense to move a customer from voice to messaging. And we're also going to do the flip side. So where it makes sense to move from messaging to voice. So on voice, in some journeys, the customer isn't ready to make a decision there and then. There's contemplation required. Maybe they need to go away and think about it. So how great would it be if on voice, once we've gone through, a series of engagements and interactions, if we get to that point where the customer's sort of not sure, they want to think about things, sending out, a summary of what was discussed. Here's the 2 different plans that might be good for you, the pros and cons, and here's sort of like the brochureware and everything, and maybe some personalized call to action buttons that they can click on to get back in touch or to self-serve and sign up to those plans when they're ready is kind of a, a good way to go in terms of let's free up this phone line now. Like it's over to you. You need to think about what you're going to do next and not rushing the customer on the phone. Um, we talked about information dissemination. That works very good in messaging, especially if that information is interactive. Okay, so if there's buttons, there's carousels, maybe there's a vehicle configurator where I want to build all of the style of my car, then maybe you sort of push out to messaging at that point. We forget the nuance that messaging lives very close to digital. So it's where there might be a happy path in digital, like a refund process or just paying a bill. If we've detected that intent on voice, it does make sense to jump to messaging so then messaging can just deep link into your app and sort of not leave the customer to fend for themselves in digital, right? Because they called through because they wanted help or reassurance, but is there white gloving the digital experience? So that we'll talk about that a bit more in a sec. Voice bots have gotten very good at real-time language translation, so helping an agent, a human agent, translate live. But that technology does come at a cost. And so what we've seen is brands coming to us to ask, hey, your language translation is, it's sort of doing everything it needs to do for messaging. Can we start moving some of the traffic across to messaging where we hit those cases where we've got a customer speaking a language that our human agents don't speak? So offering that edge case of multilingual, but instead of tackling it in voice real time, doing it in messaging where there's a bit more time to review the translation and the cost of the translation is less because we're not going to voice. Um, yeah, so we've had customers come and wanting to shift volume specifically for that translation use case. Um, Lastly, on the voice use cases, I've put in there shorter time to first meaningful interaction. Now, on voice, we would be familiar that you can end up in long queues. Like 30 minutes is not uncommon, just to wait for that first response. Now, you could put a voice bot in there and maybe get something more meaningful happening while they wait. That'd be a good idea. But if you can't do it in voice, maybe jump to messaging where you've got a human or an AI that can help. The point is, you want to have a meaningful interaction with the customer as soon as possible to instill trust. Hey, we've got this. We're going to help you out. Let's do as much as we can. Yeah, maybe the wait times on messaging are less, but we want to have a meaningful interaction as quickly as we can, especially in a sales use case. And then in terms of the the way in which this would work on the right-hand side, these are the typical channels and entry points we would use to send out that message proactively. So if we're jumping from the voice channel to messaging, very common is the in-app notification for in-app messaging, because that then places us right within your app. And like I keep on saying, that allows a massive opportunities of interacting with your app to get things done. The other way, so perhaps I've been routed and channeled and I'm deep within a messaging interaction. Where are the instances where it would make sense to jump to voice? Um, Oftentimes, if we detect churn, therefore we're in a retention or win back use case, brands will be wanting to offer to get that customer on the phone. And because the human emotion, the human empathy, the humanness of the voice is, of course, superior than the messaging channel, right? So being able to have that empathy is really important for that style of use case. And similarly, for a high value conversation, maybe a big sale, a big life milestone, buying a house, which would entail a loan, thinking about your family's health insurance, um, retirement planning, all big life milestone things. And sometimes with that, you might be able to get a degree of the journey fulfilled in messaging, but at least offering or being able to um, move a customer to voice at the right moment is pretty important, where that voice is required. And we know with complex products, there's this concept of credence-based trust, right? So credence advice. So where a product might be complex. We want to at least hear an expert in the field, even if it's the person that's selling to us, at least say, hey, you've got this, reiterating the factors that have led to the decision, and just hearing some reassurance from a human can make all the difference. There might be sensitive conversations around vulnerable customers, or we might find that a messaging conversation is just getting to very high cadence and just is going to feel better if we switch to voice at that moment. I'm sure you've experienced that with friends and family where it's just like you're messaging and it's just like, oh, let's just have a phone call. At least we can talk over the top of each other then. All right. So just bringing in a more human touch when it's called for. And on the right hand side, again, are the techniques available to do this. And I think this is underutilized in the field at the moment. So many brands are not aware how simple it is to bring in a personalized callback that is specifically for that customer. The customer on messaging would say the time that is convenient to receive an inbound call, and it all gets logged. It's extremely easy to do and a great CX. Similarly, a personalized click to call. It would be even less utilized, I would say, than a callback, where now the customer gets to click a button that's been set up especially for them within messaging to be able to initiate a real phone call. And associated with that click is a known number that belongs to that customer and also a DTMF tone that associates that particular session. And therefore, we have context continuation and even a degree of authentication. So we know who the customer is when they come in. And so we've got that ladder situation, not the snake situation.
Andrew, I know, we're talking about channel switching. It seems like one of the big issues with channel switching is that authentication where you're losing context because you maybe don't have customer ID or you don't know exactly, you don't have that context to authenticate. Um, this is a pretty strong, I feel like, use case or like reason to use this like messaging to voice example because that authentication is it's easy to bake in. The technology exists and it presents such a seamless experience that the customer isn't having to repeat themselves. They're already authenticated as soon as they call in. That's a really cool example.
Yeah, and you always want to elevate the CX. Okay. I'm going from messaging. I don't want to, if I've just had a rich context rich conversation on messaging, like how painful it is to start at the beginning of an IVR tree after that. All right, just because I've reached a pivotal moment in my journey, right? I've reached the exciting bit where I need to now speak to someone and I've got to fight the IVR tree. So I rattled off an acronym before, but that's dual tone multi-frequency. DTMF is like that little number that gets attached at the end of dialing in, and using that. That is a way in which we can sort of identify not just by the inbound number, but also the attached tones on the back of that number, and then we can stitch it all together. Lastly, I think this is a bit more of a visualization of what we've discussed, of where you've got multiple channels all working together for goal attainment, and bringing in where we're seeing a lot of volume shifting to, and that's within your app and within in-app messaging, and also bringing in voice at the right moment to get things done. So we're seeing quite often this type of flow. So a customer is within your app, and apps are great at the happy path. By definition, digital self-serve is like the high volume self-service things we want to be able to offer up. But customers are complex, and not everything can go through the happy path. So customers get stuck. And when they get stuck, it's nice if they can immediately just reach for help within your app asynchronously. if you think about digital, that is sort of almost a disconnected. I'm not tied up on a phone there where I'm using digital, of course. So I could be using your app in transit on the go. So by and large, it's convenient just to start a messaging conversation. If I'm already interacting on the app, why wouldn't I want to just ask for help using messaging? So that's what's happening here. There's a charge on my bill that seems wrong. Let's review your transactions. So there's okay, let's have a look together, human to human, or maybe it's a bot that can review transactions. We've gone through the flow now, and the customer's feeling reassured. They understand about the transaction, and they're comfortable now to pay their bill. So let's do that just directly in the app. So here's the button, a deep link to take you exactly to the section within your app to go and pay the bill. That's pretty simple, but it could be beyond payments. It could be any kind of function, any self-service function. Could be pre-populated from the context of the conversation. It can be deep linked without the friction of the customer having to find that function within your app, which might have been the source of the inquiry in the first instance, not being able to navigate your app. And so we can just get that done. This is a massively underutilized technique of jumping out of conversation, doing something in digital self-serve, and then jumping back because did we attain all the goals? Is there something else that you wanted to do, or is there some nuance that we missed? So jumping back is important. And it turns out the customer is also got mindful that they need to upgrade a plan and they'd like to do that. Maybe they're on a winning streak. Hey, they're getting stuff done today through this. I'm gonna throw this out as well. Can I get some help upgrading? And for that, we actually want to get them on the phone for whatever reason. In presenting a button like this, perhaps we've got the promise of we're going to connect you instantly because we've checked our capacity and wait times. There's someone ready for this phone call. It's a personalized phone call, as in all of the context for the agent is going to be available, and it's a real phone call. It's happening through my device like a normal phone call. And then we can get on with the journey. After the phone call's finished, wouldn't it be great if the messaging conversation then continued and put a summary there or anything else, right? So it's just showing there three channels, all used relatively seamlessly, and we're just holding the customer's hand all the way to get something done.
And that brings us back to where we started, which is we really want to be focused here on designing for what customers want to achieve. And how can you get them there as seamlessly as possible? And Andrew, I know you have some great stories. And you've kind of talked to some of your experiences as we walked through the presentation, but can you share some stories or examples where you've seen brands who've really focused on this time to first meaningful interaction and what that looks like?
So I think the one that I'd like to talk about is where messaging can be highly available. So in a sales use case, um, whether it's a human or an AI agent talking to your customer, you can put enough meat on the bone to give that customer some stickiness. Part of the secret to this is baking in trust or a promise. So, hey, you've come through messaging. Maybe it's after hours. Let's at least discuss your needs about what you're looking at doing in your life or purchasing, and let's take it a certain way. And then if you still need to talk to a human, we're open at 9 o'clock the next day. We promise a personalized callback. And one of our specialized consultants is going to pick up this conversation where we left off. Um, so yeah, having that meaningful conversation, even if there's no human available, whether it's a voice bot or a messaging bot, um, that can stop that prospect from shopping around because there's been enough reciprocity, value exchange that they're sort of bought in, they're sticky. Hey, they're promising I'll have a consultant call me. And they understood what I need and my intent, but not just my intent, everything underneath my intent. Hey, I'm gonna wait this one out and see how this phone call goes the next day.
Yeah, that's a great example of really focused on designing for what customers want to achieve. So, Andrew, thank you so much. This was a really great webinar. Thank you so much for all that you've shared, the examples and the insights. I know I've walked away with a lot of really good things to think about in the different channels we pick and how those channels help us create journeys that drive goals for customers. So, thank you everyone for attending. We'll be following up with the recording and so thankful that everyone joined. And this webinar will also be on demand. So if you want to share it, feel free to do so. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.